The rain hammered against the windshield of the silver Mercedes as Christopher Hayes gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. His jaw clenched as he replayed the meeting that had just ended in disaster. 3 years of work, gone. The Nashville investors had walked away from his latest tech venture, leaving him with nothing but a hefty hotel bill and the long drive back to Denver. But as he rounded the curve on Highway 96 just outside Nashville, something made him slow down. Through the sheets of rain, he saw them, 2 small figures huddled under a makeshift canopy beside the road. They couldn't have been more than 8 years old, sitting behind a card table covered with what looked like stuffed animals. In this downpour, in the middle of nowhere, Christopher pulled over without really knowing why. Maybe it was the way they sat there so bravely, not running for shelter like any sensible person would. Maybe it was the bright red and blue raincoats that made them look like tiny lighthouses in the storm. Or maybe it was just that after the worst day of his professional life, he needed to remember that some people still had hope. He grabbed his umbrella from the back seat and jogged over to their little stand. As he got closer, he could see they were identical twins with blonde pigtails sticking out from their hoods, both shivering but maintaining determined smiles. "Hi, mister," the one on the left said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Do you want to buy a teddy bear? We made them ourselves." Christopher looked at the table. About 20 small bears sat there, clearly handmade with different colored fabric scraps. They weren't perfect. Some had crooked eyes, others had uneven ears, but there was something beautiful about their imperfection. Each one was unique, crafted with obvious care. "These are really nice," Christopher said, crouching down to their level. "But shouldn't you two be inside somewhere dry?" "We can't go in yet," the other twin said. "We need to sell more bears first. Mama needs the money for her medicine." The words hit Christopher like a punch to the gut. Here he was, feeling sorry for himself because a business deal fell through, while these 2 children sat in a thunderstorm trying to raise money for their mother's medical bills. Have you ever wondered what drives children to sacrifice their comfort for someone they love? If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Christopher's position? "What's your mama's name?" Christopher asked gently. "Rebecca Miller," they said in unison. "I'm Katie," said the first twin. "And she's Sophie," she pointed to her sister. "We live right there." Sophie pointed to a small house about 100 yards away. It was a modest place with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch, but the windows glowed warmly against the gray afternoon. Christopher felt something shift inside his chest. How much for all of them? The twins looked at each other with wide eyes. "All of them," Katie whispered. "Every single bear," Christopher confirmed. Sophie did some quick math on her fingers. "They are $5 each, so that would be..." She counted again. $100. Christopher pulled out his wallet and handed them $200 bills. "Keep the change. Consider it a tip for sitting out here in the rain." Both girls stared at the money like it was magic. Then Katie started crying. Not sad tears, but the kind that comes from relief and joy mixed together. "Mama's going to be so happy," Sophie said, carefully folding the bills. "She can get her medicine now, and maybe we can even get groceries." "Wait here," Christopher said. He ran back to his car and grabbed a large cardboard box from his trunk, one that had contained his failed presentation materials. He brought it back and carefully loaded all the teddy bears inside. "Mister, what's your name?" Katie asked as he prepared to leave. "Christopher Hayes," he said. "And I have a feeling these bears are going to bring me more luck than any business meeting ever could." As he carried the box back to his car, he could hear the twins gathering up their table and rushing toward their house, probably eager to tell their mother the good news. Christopher sat in his car for a moment, watching them disappear inside. The warm light in the windows seemed brighter now, and he found himself smiling for the first time all day. He had no idea that stopping for those teddy bears would change not just his life, but the lives of an entire community. Sometimes the best investments aren't made in boardrooms. They are made on rainy roadsides with 2 little girls who believe in hope. The rain was letting up as Christopher started his engine, but instead of heading back toward Denver, he found himself driving toward the heart of Nashville. Something told him his business in this town wasn't finished yet. Christopher couldn't shake the image of those 2 little girls from his mind. Instead of driving straight back to Denver, he found himself booking another night at the Omni Nashville Hotel. Downtown. He told himself it was because the weather was getting worse, but deep down he knew better. Those twins had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't expected. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Christopher drove back to Highway 96, telling himself he was just curious. He wanted to make sure the girls had made it home safely. But when he pulled up to the small white house, what he saw made his stomach drop. A woman was sitting on the front porch steps, her head in her hands. Even from the car, Christopher could see she was thin, too thin, and her dark hair was covered by a colorful scarf. Katie and Sophie sat on either side of her, their small hands rubbing her back in a gesture that seemed far too mature for 8-year-olds. Christopher hesitated. He was a stranger, and this was clearly a private family moment. But something about the scene pulled at him. He thought about his own mother, who had raised him alone after his father left when Christopher was 10. He remembered the nights she thought he was asleep when she would sit at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, crying quietly into her hands. Before he could talk himself out of it, Christopher got out of the car and walked up the gravel driveway. The woman looked up as he approached, quickly wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you," Christopher said. "I'm the man who bought the teddy bears from Katie and Sophie yesterday. I wanted to make sure they got home okay in that storm." The woman stood up slowly, and Christopher could see the effort it took her. But her smile was genuine and warm. "You must be Christopher. The girls haven't stopped talking about you. I'm Rebecca Miller." She extended her hand, and when Christopher shook it, he was struck by how delicate it felt. But her grip was firm, and her eyes, a clear blue that matched her daughter's, held a strength that spoke of someone who had fought many battles and wasn't planning to surrender anytime soon. "Thank you so much for what you did yesterday," Rebecca continued. "The girls were so excited. They've been selling their bears for 3 months now, and yesterday was their best day ever." 3 months. Christopher tried to keep the surprise out of his voice. "Have they been out there every day?" "After school and on weekends," Rebecca said, sitting back down on the steps. "They insisted. I tried to tell them it wasn't their responsibility, but you know how kids are when they get an idea in their heads." Katie and Sophie, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly perked up. "Mama has cancer," Sophie announced matter-of-factly. "But she's going to beat it because she's the strongest mama in the world." "The medicine costs a lot," Katie added. "So we decided to help. We learned to sew from Mrs. Thompson next door, and she gave us fabric scraps." Christopher felt his throat tighten. "What kind of cancer, if you don't mind me asking?" "Breast cancer," Rebecca said quietly. "I'm between treatments right now. The insurance covers some of it, but not all, and I haven't been able to work as much." She paused, looking out at the road. "I never wanted them to worry about money. That should be my job, not theirs." "Mama works at the diner and cleans offices at night," Sophie said proudly. "And sometimes she helps Mrs. Peterson with her computer stuff." 3 jobs, Christopher murmured, and Rebecca nodded. "I was lucky to find work that would let me adjust my schedule for treatments. My boss at the diner, Mr. Rodriguez, has been incredibly kind. He even let me bring the girls there sometimes when I couldn't find a babysitter." As if on cue, an older woman emerged from the house next door. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes, carrying a casserole dish. "Rebecca, honey, I brought you that tuna noodle casserole you like," she called out. Then she noticed Christopher. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company." "Mrs. Thompson, this is Christopher," Rebecca said. "He's the one who bought all the bears yesterday." Mrs. Thompson's face lit up. "Well, bless your heart. These girls have been working so hard. I've never seen anything like it." She turned to Christopher. "They come over to my house every evening after Rebecca gets home from her first job, and we work on those bears together. They are so determined to help their mama." Christopher was beginning to understand the full picture. This wasn't just about one struggling family. This was about a community quietly supporting each other. Mrs. Thompson wasn't just helping the twins make bears. She was providing childcare and a safe place for them while their mother worked. "Would you like to come in for some coffee?" Rebecca asked. "It's the least I can do after your kindness yesterday." The small house was clean and tidy, but Christopher could see the signs of a family stretching every dollar. The furniture was old but well cared for. The refrigerator was covered with the twins' artwork and report cards, all A's and B's. A pill organizer sat on the kitchen counter next to a neat stack of medical bills. As Rebecca poured coffee into mismatched mugs, Christopher found himself thinking about his own wealth. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, most of it from selling his first tech company at 25. He'd been trying to grow that fortune ever since, making deals and investments, always chasing the next big win. But sitting in this small kitchen, watching Rebecca move carefully around the space while her daughters chatted about school and their friends, Christopher realized he'd been missing something important. All his business successes felt hollow compared to what he was witnessing here, the quiet heroism of a mother fighting for her life while raising 2 children who were wise enough to understand that sometimes families had to take care of each other. "The girls tell me you're from Denver," Rebecca said, setting a steaming mug in front of him. I was here for a business meeting that didn't go well. I was planning to drive back yesterday, but the weather had other plans." "Well, I'm grateful for that storm," Rebecca said. "It brought you to us." Katie climbed up on the chair next to Christopher. "Are you going to stay in Nashville? We could make you more bears." Christopher looked around the table, at Katie's hopeful face, Sophie's shy smile, and Rebecca's quiet strength. For the first time in years, he found himself not thinking about the next deal or the next investment. Instead, he was thinking about how he could help make sure this family had everything they needed. "I might stay a little longer," he said. "Nashville is growing on me." Christopher spent the next 2 days in Nashville, though he couldn't exactly explain why, not even to himself. He told his assistant back in Denver that he was exploring new investment opportunities, which wasn't entirely untrue. But the investment he had in mind wasn't the kind that showed up on quarterly reports. He drove past Rebecca's house several times, always finding excuses. Once, he stopped to ask Mrs. Thompson about local contractors, claiming he was thinking about buying property in the area. Another time, he pretended to be lost and needed directions. Mrs. Thompson was happy to chat both times, and Christopher learned more about the Miller family's situation. Rebecca's medical bills were mounting faster than her insurance could cover them. The twins' father had disappeared when they were babies, leaving no forwarding address and no child support. Despite working 3 jobs, Rebecca was barely keeping up with the rent, utilities, and basic necessities, let alone the medical expenses. "That woman is a saint," Mrs. Thompson had said, shaking her head. "Never complains, never asks for help. The girls adore her, and she's raising them right. But I worry about what will happen if her condition gets worse." Christopher had nodded, filing away every detail. That evening, back in his hotel room, he made several phone calls. First, he contacted his lawyer in Denver. "I want to set up a charitable foundation," Christopher said. "Something that can operate quickly and quietly." "What kind of charitable work are you thinking about?" his lawyer asked. "Medical bills, family support, community assistance. Based in Nashville." "That's quite a departure from tech investments, Chris. May I ask what prompted this?" Christopher looked out his hotel window at the lights of Nashville spreading out below him. "Let's just say I met some people who reminded me what's really important." The next call was to his accountant. "I want to transfer $2 million into the foundation account as soon as it's set up. And I need you to research Nashville area hospitals and medical centers. I want to know who handles charity cases and how their systems work." His accountant was used to Christopher's quick decisions, but even he seemed surprised by the speed of this one. "Are you sure you want to move this fast? Usually, we'd recommend a more thorough vetting process for charitable giving." "I'm sure," Christopher said. "Sometimes the best decisions are the ones you make with your heart instead of a spreadsheet." The third call was the trickiest. He reached out to a private investigator he'd used for business due diligence in the past. "I need you to very discreetly research a family in Nashville. But I want to be clear, this isn't about finding doubt or causing problems. I want to help them, and I need to make sure I'm doing it the right way." He gave the investigator Rebecca's name and address, along with strict instructions that no one should know about the research. Find out exactly what she owes, who she owes it to, and what her ongoing medical expenses look like. And see if there are other families in similar situations in the Nashville area. I'm thinking bigger than just one case. While he waited for the wheels to turn on the legal and financial side, Christopher decided to do some ground-level research of his own. He drove around Nashville, stopping at diners, community centers, and local businesses. He asked casual questions about the area, the people, the challenges families faced. What he found amazed him. Nashville wasn't just Music City. It was a place where people genuinely looked out for each other. At Rodriguez's diner, where Rebecca worked, he learned that the owner regularly let employees take home leftover food for their families. The community center had an unofficial network of volunteers who helped with everything from car repairs to childcare. Churches of different denominations worked together to support families in crisis. "It's not that we have more money than other places," explained Maria Rodriguez, the diner owner's wife, when Christopher stopped in for lunch. "We just believe in taking care of our neighbors. When someone's hurting, we all hurt a little. When someone's celebrating, we all celebrate." Christopher found himself thinking about Denver, where he lived in a penthouse apartment and barely knew his neighbors' names. When was the last time he'd been part of a community instead of just a marketplace? On Thursday morning, his phone rang with good news from his lawyer. The Second Chances Foundation is officially registered in Tennessee. The bank accounts are set up, and you have full authority to distribute funds as you see fit. The private investigators' report came in that afternoon. Rebecca's medical bills totaled just over $48,000. Her rent was 2 months behind. The twins needed school supplies and winter clothes. But the report also included something Christopher hadn't expected, a list of 12 other families in similar situations, all within a 30-mile radius of Nashville. Single mothers battling illness, elderly couples choosing between medication and heating bills, young families struggling with job loss. The investigator had gone above and beyond, providing a clear picture of the quiet struggles happening throughout the community. Christopher sat in his hotel room that evening, looking at the reports spread out on his desk. $48,000 was less than he'd spent on his car. 2 months' rent was what he paid for a weekend in Aspen. The problems seemed so small from his perspective, but he knew they were enormous for the families facing them. He picked up his phone and called the hospital where Rebecca received her treatments. "I represent the Second Chances Foundation," he said to the billing department supervisor. "We'd like to discuss paying off some outstanding medical bills for families in need." "Oh, that's wonderful," the woman said. "We have several charity programs, but there's always more need than resources. Did you have specific cases in mind?" "I do, but I'd like to handle the payments anonymously. Is that possible?" "Absolutely. We have procedures for that. Anonymous donations are more common than you might think." Christopher spent the next hour on the phone, setting up payments not just for Rebecca's bills, but for 3 other families the investigator had identified. By the time he hung up, he'd committed over $200,000. But money was just the beginning. Christopher had learned enough about Nashville to know that what these families needed most wasn't just financial help. It was a kind of community support that already existed here, just amplified and organized better. He made one more call that evening, this time to Rebecca herself. "I hope I'm not calling too late," he said when she answered. "Not at all. The girls are doing homework, and I just got home from my evening job. How are you, Christopher? Are you back in Denver?" "Actually, I'm still in Nashville. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner tomorrow night. I have an idea I'd like to run by you." There was a pause. An idea. Something that might help not just your family, but a lot of families in this area. "I think you're the right person to help me figure out how to do it right." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Christopher, if this is about charity, I need you to know that we're not looking for handouts. The girls and we take care of ourselves." "I know you do," Christopher said. "That's exactly why I think you can help me take care of others." What would you do if someone wanted to change your entire life with one phone call? Drop a comment below and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this one. Friday evening found Christopher pacing nervously in the lobby of Etch Restaurant in downtown Nashville. He'd chosen the place carefully, nice enough to show respect for Rebecca, but not so fancy that it would make her uncomfortable. He'd also made sure they had a quiet corner table where they could talk privately. When Rebecca walked in, Christopher barely recognized her. Gone was the exhausted woman in the oversized sweatshirt he'd met earlier that week. She wore a simple navy blue dress that brought out her eyes and had styled her dark hair in soft waves around her shoulders. She was still too thin, but there was color in her cheeks and a confidence in her step that hadn't been there before. "You look beautiful," Christopher said, standing to greet her. "Thank you." Rebecca smiled, and Christopher noticed it was the first time he'd seen her smile without a shadow of worry behind it. "I have to admit, I don't remember the last time I dressed up for dinner. The girls were so excited. They helped me pick out this dress and insisted on doing my makeup." They were seated at their table, and Christopher found himself oddly nervous. In boardrooms, he commanded respect and attention. But sitting across from this woman who'd shown such quiet strength in the face of overwhelming challenges, he felt like a schoolboy trying to impress his first crush. "How are Katie and Sophie?" he asked. "They are wonderful. Mrs. Thompson is watching them tonight, and they are probably driving her crazy with questions about where I went and what I'm doing." Rebecca laughed, and the sound was like music. "They've been talking about you non-stop since you bought their bears. I think they've decided you're some kind of guardian angel." "Hardly," Christopher said. "But speaking of angels, I've been thinking about this community since I arrived. I've met more genuinely kind people in 4 days here than I have in the last 4 years in Denver." Their conversation flowed easily as they ordered dinner and wine. Christopher learned that Rebecca had grown up in a small town outside Nashville, had studied nursing before the twins were born, and dreamed of finishing her degree someday. Rebecca learned that Christopher had built his fortune in tech, but had always felt like something was missing. "You know," Rebecca said as they shared dessert, "the girls asked me if you were going to be their new daddy." Christopher nearly choked on his wine. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that not every nice man who comes into our lives is going to stay," Rebecca said quietly. "I've learned it's better to prepare them for disappointment than to let them build up false hopes." Christopher felt a pang in his chest at the sadness in her voice. "Rebecca, about that idea I mentioned on the phone. I've been wondering about that," she said. "You've been very mysterious." Christopher took a deep breath. "I want to start a foundation here in Nashville. Something that helps families like yours, people who are working hard and doing everything right, but still struggling because of medical bills or job loss or just bad luck." Rebecca frowned. "Christopher, that's very sweet, but let me finish," he said gently. "This isn't about charity. It's about community. I've seen how people here take care of each other. Mrs. Thompson helping with the twins, Mr. Rodriguez letting you adjust your schedule, the church groups bringing meals. But imagine if that kind of support was organized and funded properly." "I don't understand." Christopher leaned forward. "What if there was a foundation that could pay medical bills, but also connect people with job training, childcare, tutoring for kids? What if instead of just giving people money, we helped build a stronger community where everyone looks out for everyone else?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "And you want me to help with this?" "I want you to run it," Christopher said. "You understand what families in crisis need because you've been there. You know this community. And you have the heart for it." "Christopher, I don't have any experience running a foundation. I'm barely keeping my own life together." "You're raising 2 incredible daughters while battling cancer and working 3 jobs," Christopher said. "I'd say you're pretty good at managing the impossible." Rebecca shook her head. "Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. My medical treatments, my work schedule." "What if the medical bills weren't a concern anymore?" Christopher asked quietly. Something in his tone made Rebecca look up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I told you that as of this afternoon, your medical bills have been paid in full, along with your rent for the next 6 months?" Rebecca went very still. "Christopher, what did you do?" "I made some phone calls. The Second Chances Foundation made its first donations today." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept that. I told you, we don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," Christopher said. "It's an investment. I'm investing in you, in your family, and in this community. But more than that, I'm asking you to help me invest in others." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. Say you'll let me show you what we could build together." Rebecca wiped her eyes with a napkin. The girls were right, weren't they? You really are a guardian angel. I'm just a man who got tired of making money and wanted to start making a difference, Christopher said. But I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands what it's like to need help and what it feels like to want to help others. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Finally, Rebecca spoke. If I said yes, and I'm not saying yes yet, what would this foundation look like? Christopher smiled. Tell me what you think this community needs most. Rebecca considered the question seriously. Affordable childcare, so parents can work without worrying. Job training for people who want to improve their situations. Emergency funds for families facing medical crises. And maybe. She paused. Maybe what? A community center. Somewhere families could go for support groups, classes, activities for kids. Somewhere people could connect with each other instead of struggling alone. Christopher felt excitement building in his chest. All of that is possible. More than possible. But why Nashville? Why here? Because this is where I met two little girls selling teddy bears in the rain to help their mama, Christopher said simply. Because this is where I remembered what community is supposed to look like. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Rebecca turned to Christopher with a serious expression. If we do this, and I'm still thinking about it, I need you to understand something. This community doesn't need saving. These people are strong and capable and they take care of each other. What we'd be doing is supporting something that's already beautiful, not fixing something that's broken. Christopher nodded. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Walking Rebecca to her car, Christopher felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And for the first time since his father left, he found himself thinking about building something that would last, something that mattered more than profit margins or market shares. Something that felt like home. Christopher spent the weekend looking at properties around Nashville. By Monday morning, he'd made an offer on a beautiful old building in the heart of the city, a former bank with high ceilings and large windows that would be perfect for a community center. The real estate agent seemed shocked that he was willing to pay cash and waive the inspection, but Christopher had learned to trust his instincts. Rebecca had agreed to meet him at the building Monday afternoon, after her morning shift at the diner. When she arrived, Christopher was standing on the sidewalk with an elderly black man in overalls who was pointing at various parts of the building's exterior. Rebecca, I'd like you to meet James Washington, Christopher said. He's been doing restoration work in Nashville for 40 years. James, this is Rebecca Miller, the woman I told you about. James tipped his cap politely. Pleasure to meet you. Christopher here tells me you two are planning to turn this old place into something special. We're thinking about it, Rebecca said carefully. She looked up at the building's brick facade and tall windows. It's beautiful. But it must cost a fortune to renovate. That's the interesting part, James said with a grin. I've been looking for a project to get my whole crew involved in. We've got electricians, plumbers, painters, carpenters, all good men who've been talking about wanting to give back to the community. If you folks can handle materials, we might be willing to donate most of the labor. Rebecca looked between Christopher and James. You're serious? Dead serious, James said. My grandson goes to school with a little girl, whose mama works 3 jobs to pay for her daddy's cancer treatments. My neighbor lost her house last year because she had to choose between her mortgage and her heart medication. This neighborhood needs something like what Christopher described to me. As they toured the inside of the building, Rebecca began to see the possibilities. The main floor could house offices for the foundation, along with meeting rooms for support groups and classes. The basement could be converted into a childcare center. The second floor could hold a computer lab, study rooms for kids, and space for community events. The old bank vault could be perfect for storing donations, she said, warming to the idea. Clothes, school supplies, holiday gifts for families. And look at this space, Christopher said, leading them to a large room with soaring ceilings. This could be perfect for community dinners, meetings, maybe even small concerts. James nodded approvingly. You two have good vision. This place could really be something special. That evening, Rebecca invited Christopher over for dinner with the twins. It was the first time he'd been inside their house since that morning earlier in the week, and he was amazed by the change. The stack of medical bills was gone from the kitchen counter, replaced by the twins' latest craft project, more teddy bears, but these ones were clearly just for fun. Christopher, guess what? Katie bounced in her chair as Rebecca served spaghetti with meat sauce. Mama said we might get to help with your foundation thing. It's not just my foundation, Christopher said, looking at Rebecca. It's ours. Your mama is going to be in charge. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? Mama, you get to be the boss. Rebecca laughed. Well, we're going to work together. But yes, I suppose I would be running the day-to-day operations. This is the best week ever, Katie declared. First you bought all our bears, then Mama got to go on a fancy date, and now she gets a new job helping people. It was a business dinner, Rebecca corrected, but she was smiling. Not a date. Christopher caught her eye across the table and winked, making her blush. After dinner, while the twins worked on homework at the kitchen table, Christopher and Rebecca sat on the front porch planning the foundation's first steps. I've been thinking about what you said Friday night, Rebecca said. About supporting what's already here instead of trying to fix what's broken. I made some calls over the weekend. Assistance was at the top of the list, followed by affordable childcare, job training, and transportation help. But there were other things too: mentorship programs for teenagers, literacy classes for adults, support groups for families dealing with illness. Mrs. Rodriguez from the diner wants to teach cooking classes for families on tight budgets, Rebecca said. She knows how to make healthy meals that don't cost much. And Pastor Williams from Second Baptist said his congregation would love to help with a tutoring program. What about Mrs. Thompson? Does she want to be involved? Rebecca grinned. She wants to organize a volunteer army. She already has 23 women who've said they'd help with everything from childcare to meal preparation to administrative work. She's calling them the Angel Brigade. Christopher felt that familiar warmth in his chest. It sounds like this foundation is going to be a community effort from day one. That's the only way it will work, Rebecca said. People have to feel like they are part of it, not just recipients of charity. They spent the next hour sketching out organizational plans. Rebecca would oversee daily operations and work directly with families in need. Christopher would handle the financial side and strategic planning. They'd form a board of directors made up of community leaders, including James Washington, Mrs. Rodriguez, Pastor Williams, and several others. I want to do something else too, Christopher said as they wrapped up their planning. I want to create a microloan program for people who want to start small businesses. Like if someone wants to open a food truck or a home daycare or a handyman service, small loans to help people become self-sufficient. Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. I love that. It's about giving people opportunities, not just assistance. Exactly. Christopher paused, then looked at Rebecca seriously. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. What made you trust me? I'm a stranger who showed up out of nowhere with a lot of money and big plans. Why didn't you tell me to leave you alone? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street where her daughters had sat selling teddy bears just a week ago. Do you know what the hardest part of being sick has been? She finally said. It's not the treatments or the pain, or even the fear. It's the feeling that I was failing my girls. That I couldn't provide for them the way a good mother should. Christopher started to protest, but Rebecca held up her hand. I know it's not rational. I know I've done everything I could. But when you're watching your 8-year-old daughters sit in the rain trying to raise money for your medical bills. She trailed off, then looked at Christopher directly. You came along and reminded me that sometimes it's okay to let people help. And more than that, you offered me a chance to help others. You gave me back my purpose. Christopher felt his throat tighten. Rebecca. So that's why I trust you, she said simply. Because you didn't just want to fix my problems. You wanted to partner with me to fix everyone's problems. As Christopher drove back to his hotel that night, he found himself thinking about his father. The man who had walked out when times got tough, who chose to run rather than fight for his family. Christopher had spent his whole adult life trying to prove he wasn't like his father, building wealth, achieving success, never backing down from a challenge. But now he realized the real test wasn't about building an empire or winning in business. It was about building something that would make life better for people like Rebecca and her daughters. It was about staying when things got difficult, not because you had to, but because you chose to. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant in Denver. "I need you to put my penthouse on the market," he said without preamble. "Sir? Are you sure about that?" "I'm sure. I'm moving to Nashville permanently. This is where I belong." 3 weeks into November, the Second Chances Foundation was officially operational. Christopher had rented a temporary office space while the building renovation continued, and Rebecca had quit 2 of her 3 jobs to work full-time as the foundation's executive director. The change in her was remarkable. The stress lines around her eyes had softened, and she moved with energy and purpose that Christopher found mesmerizing. They'd settled into a comfortable working rhythm. Mornings were spent reviewing applications and meeting with families. Afternoons were devoted to building partnerships with local businesses and organizations. Evenings often found them at the renovation site, planning layouts and watching James Washington's crew transform the old bank into something beautiful. But it was the quiet moments that Christopher treasured most, when Rebecca would laugh at something one of the volunteers said, when she'd get animated talking about a new program idea, when she'd absently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear while reviewing paperwork. He was falling in love with her, and he was pretty sure she knew it. The problem was, Rebecca seemed determined to keep things strictly professional. "We should probably discuss the holiday gift program," Rebecca said one Friday evening as they walked through the construction site. James and his crew had just finished installing new windows, and the late afternoon sun was streaming through them in golden shafts. "The Angel Brigade has already collected enough toys and clothes for 43 families," Christopher said, stepping carefully around some construction debris. "Mrs. Thompson is organizing it like a military operation." Rebecca laughed. "She really is. Did you know she has color-coded spreadsheets for everything? And she's recruited volunteers from 6 different churches now." "Speaking of volunteers," Christopher said, "I think we need to discuss something else." "What's that?" Christopher stopped walking and turned to face her. "The fact that I'm in love with you." Rebecca went very still. They were standing in what would soon be the main meeting room, surrounded by the tools and materials of renovation, and Christopher thought there was something perfect about declaring his feelings in this space they were building together. "Christopher," Rebecca started, but her voice was barely a whisper. "I know what you're going to say," Christopher said gently. "That this is complicated, that we work together, that you're not ready. But I needed you to know how I feel." Rebecca looked down at her hands. "It's not that I don't. I mean, I care about you too. More than I probably should." "Then what's the problem?" "Look at us," Rebecca said, gesturing around them. "Look at this situation. You're a billionaire who could have anyone you want. I'm a single mom with 2 kids and a bunch of medical debt you had to pay off. This feels like a fairy tale, and fairy tales don't happen to people like me." Christopher stepped closer. "What if I told you that before I met you and the twins, I felt like I was sleepwalking through my life? What if I told you that everything I've built, all the money I've made, felt meaningless until I found a purpose worth sharing with someone?" "That's a beautiful thing to say, but dash." "But nothing," Christopher said, taking her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking you to let this be whatever it's supposed to be instead of being afraid of it." Rebecca looked up at him, and Christopher could see the internal battle in her blue eyes. Fear warring with hope, practical concerns fighting with emotion. "The girls adore you," she said quietly. "If this doesn't work out, it will break their hearts." "It will break mine too," Christopher said. "So we'll just have to make sure it works out." Before Rebecca could respond, they heard the sound of running feet and excited voices. Katie and Sophie burst through the front door of the building, followed by Mrs. Thompson. "Mama, Mama, look what we made." Katie called out, holding up a construction paper turkey with thankful written across its feathers. "We wrote down everything we're thankful for," Sophie explained, running over to show Rebecca the turkey. Want to see? Rebecca knelt down to examine the girl's artwork, and Christopher peered over her shoulder to read the items listed on the feathers. Mama feeling better. New friends, Mr. Christopher. Mrs. Thompson's cookies. Our new house. Apparently they considered the foundation building their second home, and angel volunteers. This is beautiful. Girls, Rebecca said, hugging them both. Mr. Christopher should make one too, Katie declared. What are you thankful for? Christopher looked at Rebecca, who was still kneeling with her arms around her daughters, and felt his heart swell with an emotion so powerful it almost knocked him over. I'm thankful for rainy days, he said simply, and little girls who are brave enough to sit outside in them. Mrs. Thompson, who had been watching the exchange with knowing eyes, cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt this sweet moment, but Rebecca, honey, we need to talk about the Thanksgiving dinner plan. We've got 17 families signed up now, and I think we're going to need a bigger space than the community center. What about A? Christopher suggested, gesturing around the construction site. The main floor will be ready by then, won't it, James? James Washington, who had just emerged from the basement with his tool bag, nodded. Should be. We'll have the floors done and the basic electrical in. Won't be pretty, but it'll be functional. A construction site Thanksgiving dinner. Rebecca looked uncertain. I think it's perfect, said a voice from the doorway. Pastor Williams from Second Baptist had arrived, along with Maria Rodriguez from the diner. We came to check on the progress, Pastor Williams explained. But a Thanksgiving dinner here would be symbolic. Families coming together in a space that represents new beginnings and community support. Maria Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. I can coordinate the cooking with the other volunteers. We'll make it a real feast. As the group continued planning the dinner, Christopher found himself watching Rebecca coordinate with the volunteers, manage her daughter's excitement, and solve problems with natural leadership skills. She was in her element, and she was beautiful. Later, after Mrs. Thompson had taken the twins home and the volunteers had left, Christopher and Rebecca found themselves alone again in the half-finished building. You're really good at this, Christopher said, watching Rebecca make notes about the Thanksgiving dinner plans. At what? Leading. Inspiring people. Making everyone feel like they are part of something important. Rebecca smiled. It doesn't feel like work when you believe in what you're doing. That's how I feel about you, Christopher said quietly. Rebecca looked up from her notes, and this time she didn't look away. Christopher. I meant what I said earlier, he said, moving closer. About letting this be whatever it's supposed to be. This time, Rebecca didn't back away when he cupped her face in his hands. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too, Christopher admitted. But I think the best things are usually a little scary. When he kissed her, soft and gentle in the golden light streaming through the new windows, Rebecca didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, and Christopher thought that all the money in the world couldn't buy a moment as perfect as this one. Outside, Nashville was settling into evening, but inside the future home of the Second Chances Foundation, two people who had found their purpose were discovering they might have found their hearts as well. Kiss-giving morning dawned crisp and clear in Nashville. Christopher arrived at the foundation building at dawn to find James Washington and his crew already there, putting finishing touches on the space that would host the community dinner. You boys didn't have to work today, Christopher said, bringing coffee and donuts for everyone. Wouldn't miss it, James replied, adjusting one of the folding tables they'd borrowed from various churches. My wife's been cooking for 2 days. This is her favorite kind of project. By 8 a.m., the Angel Brigade had arrived in force. Mrs. Thompson directed the volunteer army with the precision of a seasoned general, assigning tasks and coordinating the arrival of dishes from 17 different families. Christopher, honey, we need you to help move tables, Mrs. Thompson called out. And where's Rebecca? The coffee urns need to be set up. She went to pick up her latest test results this morning, Christopher said, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. She should be back soon. Rebecca had been putting off the 3-month follow-up scans, claiming she was too busy with foundation work. But her oncologist had finally insisted, and she'd scheduled the appointment for early Thanksgiving morning. Christopher had wanted to go with her, but she'd insisted on going alone. Don't look so worried, Mrs. Thompson said, patting Christopher's arm. "That girl is stronger than she knows. The results will be fine." Christopher hoped she was right. Over the past month, as he and Rebecca had grown closer, he tried not to think about the possibility that her cancer might return. But seeing her leave for the appointment that morning had brought all his fears rushing back. Katie and Sophie arrived with Mrs. Peterson, a neighbor who was helping watch them during the morning preparations. "Mr. Christopher, where's Mama?" Sophie asked, running over to hug him. "She had to take care of something, but she'll be here soon," Christopher said, lifting Sophie up. "Want to help me arrange flowers on the tables?" The girls threw themselves into the preparations with enthusiasm, folding napkins and arranging the centerpieces that Mrs. Thompson's brigade had created from autumn leaves and small pumpkins. Watching them work, Christopher marveled at their resilience. These children had been through more challenges than most adults, yet they approached everything with joy and determination. By 10 a.m., families were beginning to arrive. Christopher recognized some of them. The Hendersons, whose medical bills the foundation had helped with, the Johnsons, who were participating in the job training program, the Garcias, who had received emergency assistance when Mr. Garcia was laid off from the auto plant. But there were also faces he didn't know, friends and neighbors who had heard about the dinner and wanted to be part of the community celebration. The building filled with the sound of children playing, adults catching up with each other, and volunteers bustling around with final preparations. At 10:30, Christopher's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "On my way. Have news." His heart clenched. News could be good or bad, and the brevity of the message didn't give him any clues. 15 minutes later, Rebecca walked through the front door, and Christopher knew immediately from her expression that everything was going to be all right. "Mama." Katie and Sophie ran to her, and Rebecca scooped them up in a hug that lifted both girls off the ground. "How did it go?" Mrs. Thompson asked, and the entire room seemed to quiet down waiting for the answer. Rebecca looked around at all the faces, volunteers, foundation families, neighbors who had become friends. "Clean scans," she said simply. "No sign of cancer anywhere." The cheer that went up from the crowd was deafening. Christopher felt tears sting his eyes as he watched Rebecca accept hugs and congratulations from everyone around her. When she finally made her way over to him, he pulled her into his arms without caring who was watching. "I was so scared," he whispered into her hair. "Me too," she whispered back. "But we okay. We all okay." Pastor Williams called for everyone's attention and asked for a moment of gratitude before the meal. As the room fell quiet, Christopher looked around at the scene. Dozens of families gathered in a space that had been nothing but an empty building just 2 months ago. Volunteers who had become friends working together to create something beautiful. Children playing together regardless of their family's circumstances. "I'd like to start our Thanksgiving by recognizing some people who've made this day possible," Pastor Williams said. Christopher Hayes, who had the vision to create the Second Chances Foundation, and Rebecca Miller, who had the heart to make it real. The applause was warm and sustained, but Christopher barely heard it. He was looking at Rebecca, who was standing with her daughters, her face glowing with health and happiness. She caught his eye and smiled, and Christopher felt like the luckiest man in the world. The dinner was everything Christopher had hoped it would be. Families shared stories, children made new friends, and volunteers mingled with the families they'd been helping. The food was abundant and delicious: turkey and ham, casseroles and vegetables, homemade bread and pies. But more than the food, Christopher was amazed by the sense of community in the room. These weren't wealthy people. Most were struggling with various challenges. But they were generous with each other, sharing not just a meal but their time, their attention, and their support. James Washington stood up during dessert to make an announcement. "I wanted everyone to know that the renovation will be complete by Christmas," he said. "And my crew and I have decided to donate all our labor for the second phase to the community center upstairs and the childcare space in the basement." "That's not all," Maria Rodriguez added. "The Restaurant Association has voted to provide free meals for all foundation events next year. We want to do our part." Christopher felt Rebecca squeeze his hand under the table. This was what they'd envisioned from the beginning, not just a foundation that helped people, but a community that supported itself. As the dinner wound down and families began to leave, many of them stopped to thank Christopher and Rebecca personally. But Christopher was struck by how many of them also offered help, volunteer hours, professional services, donations of time and materials. "This is how it's supposed to work," Rebecca said as they cleaned up the last of the dishes. "People helping each other, everyone contributing what they can." Katie and Sophie, exhausted from the excitement of the day, had fallen asleep on a pile of coats in the corner. Mrs. Thompson covered them with a blanket and whispered to Rebecca, "Those girls know they are loved by a whole community," she said. "That's the greatest gift you can give a child." As the last volunteer left and Christopher locked up the building, he found Rebecca standing in the middle of the main room, looking around at the space they'd created together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About second chances," she said, leaning back against him. "6 months ago, I thought my life was falling apart. I was sick, broke, working 3 jobs just to stay afloat. I never imagined I could be this happy. You know what I'm thankful for?" Christopher said. "What?" "That you were brave enough to let me love you." Rebecca turned in his arms, and when she looked up at him, Christopher saw everything he'd ever wanted reflected in her eyes. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I have since that first dinner, but I was too scared to admit it." As they stood there in the building that represented their shared dreams, surrounded by the lingering warmth of community and celebration, Christopher knew that he'd found what he'd been searching for his whole life without even knowing it. Not just love, but purpose. Not just success, but significance. Not just a life, but a life worth living. Oh, in Nashville brought an early cold snap and the busiest month the Second Chances Foundation had ever experienced. Christmas applications for assistance had poured in, and Rebecca found herself working 12-hour days to ensure every family would have presents under their trees and food on their tables. Christopher watched her throw herself into the work with admiration and growing concern. She was healthier than she'd been in years, but she was also driving herself harder than ever. When he suggested she might want to delegate more responsibilities, she just laughed. "These families are counting on us," she said, barely looking up from the stack of applications she was reviewing. "I can't let them down." "You won't let them down by taking a break once in a while," Christopher said gently. "I'll rest after Christmas," Rebecca promised, but Christopher had heard that promise before. The foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations. They now had 43 regular volunteers, partnerships with 37 local businesses, and had helped over 200 families since opening their doors. The building renovation was nearly complete, and they were already making plans for expanding their programs in the new year. But Christopher's favorite part of the whole operation remained the same, watching Rebecca work with families, seeing the way she made everyone feel heard and valued, witnessing the transformation that happened when people realized they weren't alone in their struggles. He'd been carrying an engagement ring in his pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment to propose. But every time he thought about bringing it up, Rebecca would get pulled into another crisis or emergency that needed her attention. Finally, Mrs. Thompson cornered him at the foundation office on December 20th. "Christopher Hayes, you're being an idiot," she said without preamble. "Excuse me. That ring you've been carrying around. When are you going to give it to that girl?" Christopher stared at her. "How did you?" "Honey, I've been married for 4 to 5 years. I know what a man looks like when he's trying to work up the courage to propose. Besides, you keep patting your pocket every 10 minutes. Christopher sighed. "I keep waiting for the perfect moment, but Rebecca's so busy with Christmas preparations." "The perfect moment is the one you create," Mrs. Thompson said firmly. "That girl needs to know she's loved, not just by this community, but by you specifically. And those twins need to know they are going to have a daddy who's planning to stick around." "What if she says no?" Mrs. Thompson gave him a look that could have melted steel. "Christopher Hayes, I have watched that woman fall in love with you over these past 5 months. She lights up every time you walk into a room. She asks your opinion on everything important. And she's been wearing that little blue dress you complimented once a week for 2 months. If you think she's going to say no, you're the biggest fool in Tennessee." That evening, Christopher asked Rebecca if she'd take a drive with him after they closed the foundation for the day. "Where are we going?" she asked as they got into his car. "Somewhere special," Christopher said. "Trust me." He drove them out to Highway 96, to the exact spot where Katie and Sophie had been selling their teddy bears on that rainy day in October. The small roadside area looked different now. Someone had placed a small bench there, and there were tire tracks in the gravel from cars that had pulled over. "This is where it all started," Christopher said as they got out of the car. Rebecca looked around, smiling at the memory. The girls still talk about that day. They call it their miracle day. "It was my miracle day too," Christopher said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box he'd been carrying. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something." Rebecca's eyes went wide as Christopher dropped to one knee on the gravel. "5 months ago, I was a lonely man who thought success was measured in dollars and deals," he said. "Then I met a woman who showed me what real strength looks like, what real love means, and what real purpose feels like." Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth, tears already starting to flow. "You and Katie and Sophie have given me a family, a home, and a reason to be the man I always wanted to be but never knew how to become," Christopher continued. "Rebecca Miller, will you marry me? Will you let me be the husband you deserve and the father those amazing girls need?" The ring caught the late afternoon sunlight as Christopher opened the box. It was a classic solitaire, elegant but not flashy, exactly right for Rebecca. "Christopher." Rebecca whispered. "I know it's fast," Christopher said. "I know we've only known each other 5 months. But I also know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life loving you and the twins and building something beautiful together." Rebecca was quiet for so long that Christopher started to worry. Then she laughed, not the nervous laugh he'd been afraid of, but the joyful sound he'd fallen in love with. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, of course, yes." Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. When he stood up, Rebecca threw her arms around him and kissed him with all the emotion of the past 5 months, the fear, the hope, the growing love, and the dawning certainty that they were meant to be together. "I love you so much," Rebecca said against his lips. "I can't believe this is real." "It's real," Christopher said, holding her close. "We're real." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the place where their story had begun, watching the sun set over the Nashville countryside. Finally, Rebecca pulled back to look at the ring again. "It's perfect," she said. "But I have one condition." Christopher's heart skipped. "What's that?" "We have to tell the girls together. They are going to be so excited." "Actually," Christopher said with a grin, "I think they already know." "What do you mean?" Christopher pulled out his phone and showed Rebecca a text message from Katie, sent an hour earlier. "Is tonight the night you ask Mama to marry you? We're ready to be your daughters too." Rebecca laughed until she cried. "How long have they known?" "Since about 2 weeks after we met, I think. Mrs. Thompson says 8-year-olds have better romantic intuition than adults." As they drove back toward town, Rebecca's phone started buzzing with congratulatory texts. Apparently, Mrs. Thompson had been busy spreading the news to the Angel Brigade. "I can't believe this is my life," Rebecca said, looking at the ring sparkling on her finger. 6 months ago, I was afraid I was going to die and leave my daughters alone. Now I'm engaged to the most wonderful man in the world, completely healthy, and doing work that I love." "What do you think changed?" Christopher asked. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think I learned to let people love me," she said finally. "And I learned that sometimes the best way to take care of your family is to build a bigger family around them." Christopher reached over and took her hand. "I can't wait to marry you." "How do you feel about a Christmas wedding?" Rebecca asked with a mischievous smile. "This Christmas? That's 5 days away." "I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. All our friends and family are already gathered here for the holidays. The foundation building is beautiful now. Mrs. Thompson's brigade could plan a wedding in their sleep. And I don't want to wait any longer to start our real life together." Christopher thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Let's do it." "Really? Really? I've waited 32 years to find you. I don't want to wait another day longer than necessary to marry you." Can you imagine planning a wedding in 5 days? What's the craziest romantic thing you've ever done for love? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe to see how this incredible love story ends. Next morning, Christopher woke up to the sound of his phone ringing nonstop. Word of the engagement and the Christmas Day wedding plan had spread through Nashville faster than he'd thought possible, and apparently everyone wanted to help. "Christopher. Honey, this is Maria Rodriguez," said the voice when he answered the third call. "I heard about the wedding, and I want to donate the catering. My whole family does weddings, and Christmas Day is perfect for us." Before Christopher could even respond, his phone beeped with another call. "Hold on, Maria," he said, clicking over. "Hello. Mr. Christopher, this is James Washington. My wife does flowers for weddings, and we'd be honored to handle the arrangements. No charge, of course." Christopher's head was spinning. He clicked back to Maria. "Maria, are you still there?" "I'm here, honey. And I just talked to Pastor Williams. He wants to perform the ceremony. Says it would be his Christmas gift to you and Rebecca." By the time Christopher made it to the foundation office at 9 a.m., he found Rebecca sitting at her desk looking shell-shocked, surrounded by notes and surrounded by the Angel Brigade in full planning mode. "Dress," Mrs. Thompson was saying, consulting a list that seemed to be growing by the minute. "Rebecca, honey, what size are you? My daughter-in-law owns a bridal shop, and she's opening it special today, just for you." "But I can't afford a wedding dress," Rebecca protested. "Maybe I could just wear something I already have." "Nonsense," said Janet Peterson, another Angel Brigade member. "This is your wedding day. You're getting a proper dress." Katie and Sophie were bouncing around the office like pinballs, practically vibrating with excitement. "Are we going to be flower girls?" Sophie asked. "Can we wear matching dresses?" Katie added. "And can we help make the teddy bear decorations?" they asked in unison. Christopher looked at Rebecca questioningly. "Teddy bear decorations?" "The girls' idea," Rebecca said with a helpless smile. "They want to incorporate their bears into the wedding somehow, since that's how we met." "I love it," Christopher said, and he meant it. "This whole thing is perfect." Mrs. Thompson consulted her ever-growing list. Music. Pastor William's son plays guitar, and his daughter sings. Photography. The Hendersons' oldest boy does wedding photography as a side business. Flowers. The Washingtons. Food. The Rodriguez family. Decorations. The Angel Brigade. Venue. Right here in our beautiful building. "What about rings?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "We need wedding bands." Christopher grinned. "Already handled. I called the jeweler this morning. They're engraving them today." "What about your family?" Rebecca asked. "Shouldn't they be here?" Christopher's expression sobered slightly. "My mom died when I was in college, and my father." He shrugged. "We haven't spoken in years. But I called my best friend from Denver last night. He's driving down today to be my best man." "What about your family?" Christopher asked Rebecca. "My parents died in a car accident when the twins were babies," Rebecca said quietly. "But Mrs. Thompson has volunteered to walk me down the aisle, if that's okay with everyone." Mrs. Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "It would be my honor, honey." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Angel Brigade transformed the foundation building into a winter wonderland, with white lights, evergreen garlands, and red poinsettias. The twins' teddy bears were incorporated into the centerpieces, each one holding a small bouquet of baby's breath. Rebecca's dress fitting was an event in itself. Mrs. Thompson's daughter-in-law, Sarah, had brought 5 dresses for Rebecca to try on, all in different styles. "This is the one," Katie declared when Rebecca emerged from the changing room in a simple but elegant white dress with 3/4 sleeves and a flowing skirt. "It's perfect for Mama," Sophie agreed. Sarah made minor alterations on the spot, taking in the waist and shortening the hem. "My wedding gift," she insisted when Rebecca tried to pay. Christopher spent his time making sure the practical details were handled: the marriage license, the rings, arrangements for his friend Marcus to stay at the hotel. But mostly, he found himself marveling at how the community had embraced their wedding as their own celebration. "It's like the whole town is getting married," Marcus observed when he arrived from Denver on December 23rd. "I've never seen anything like it." "That's Nashville for you," Christopher said. "Actually, that's this community. These people have become family." Marcus, a successful lawyer who had been Christopher's roommate in college, looked around at the bustling wedding preparations with amazement. "You've changed, man," he said. "I mean, you seem, I don't know, more like yourself than I've ever seen you." "What do you mean?" "In college, you were always striving for something, always reaching for the next goal. Even after you made your fortune, you were still chasing something. But now you seem like you found what you were looking for." Christopher thought about that as he watched Rebecca directing the final decorating efforts, the twins helping by holding ribbons and offering suggestions. 6 months ago, he'd been driving back from a failed business meeting, feeling like his life was empty despite all his success. Now he was surrounded by friends, about to marry the love of his life, and doing work that made a real difference in people's lives. "Yeah," he said to Marcus. "I think I have found what I was looking for. I just didn't know I was looking for it." On Christmas Eve, the rehearsal was small and intimate, just the wedding party, the angel brigade, and a few close friends. Pastor Williams walked them through the ceremony, while Maria Rodriguez and her family set up for the reception dinner. "Tomorrow is going to be perfect," Rebecca said as they stood together in the decorated building, looking at everything they created together, not just the wedding preparations, but the foundation, the community, the life they were building. "It already is perfect," Christopher said, kissing her forehead. "Everything after tomorrow is just bonus." That night, Christopher lay in his hotel bed thinking about the journey that had brought him here. From a lonely billionaire driving through Nashville in the rain to a man about to marry the woman of his dreams and become father to 2 incredible little girls. Tomorrow, he would officially become part of a family. Not just Rebecca and the twins, but the whole community that had embraced him and shown him what love really looked like. He fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming of teddy bears and Christmas mornings and a future filled with purpose and joy. Tomorrow's morning dawned bright and clear in Nashville, with just a dusting of snow that made everything look like a postcard. Christopher woke up early, but not as early as his phone, which had been buzzing with good wishes since 6 a.m. At the foundation building, the Angel Brigade had arrived before dawn to put the finishing touches on the decorations. Mrs. Thompson directed operations with military precision, while Katie and Sophie helped arrange the teddy bear centerpieces they'd made. "Mr. Christopher's here," Sophie announced as Christopher arrived with Marcus and Pastor Williams. The building looked magical. White lights twinkled everywhere. The Christmas tree in the corner was surrounded by wrapped presents for the foundation families, and the space they'd created for the ceremony was perfect, intimate but spacious enough for everyone who wanted to attend. Christopher was amazed by how many people had come. The entire Angel Brigade, of course, plus all the foundation families, volunteers from various churches, neighbors, local business owners who had partnered with the foundation, and even some people Christopher didn't recognize, but who clearly felt connected to their story. "Nervous?" Marcus asked as they waited in the small office that was serving as Christopher's dressing room. "Not even a little bit," Christopher said, adjusting his tie. "This is the best decision I've ever made." Meanwhile, in the upstairs room that would soon become part of the community center, Rebecca was getting ready with the help of the Angel Brigade. Her dress fit perfectly, her hair was styled in soft waves, and the twins looked like angels in their matching green velvet dresses. "Mama, you look like a princess," Katie said, standing on her tiptoes to help with Rebecca's veil. "The prettiest princess in the world," Sophie added. Mrs. Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Rebecca, honey, you look absolutely beautiful. Are you ready for this?" Rebecca looked at herself in the mirror, then at the women who had become her dearest friends, then at her daughters, who were practically glowing with excitement. "I've been ready since the day I met him," she said simply. The ceremony began at 2 o'clock. Christopher took his place at the front of the room, with Marcus beside him and Pastor Williams ready to perform the service. The small string quartet, volunteers from the high school, began playing, and the guests rose to their feet. Sophie and Katie came down the aisle first, scattering rose petals and grinning so widely Christopher thought their faces might split. They took their places at the front, each holding a small bouquet and practically bouncing with excitement. Then Mrs. Thompson appeared at the back of the room with Rebecca on her arm, and Christopher felt his breath catch in his throat. Rebecca was radiant, not just beautiful, but glowing with happiness and health and love. As she walked toward him, Christopher saw their entire future stretching out ahead of them. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Pastor Williams asked when they reached the front. "Her community does," Mrs. Thompson said firmly, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The ceremony was simple but perfect. Pastor Williams spoke about love, commitment, and the importance of community. Rebecca and Christopher exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising not just to love each other, but to continue building something meaningful together. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered community was loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. Christopher kissed his bride while Katie and Sophie jumped up and down with joy, and everyone laughed and cried at the same time. But Christopher's favorite moment came during the reception, when he was officially introduced to Katie and Sophie as their new father. "Girls," Rebecca said, kneeling down to their level, "you know that Mr. Christopher and I are married now, which means is part of our family forever. Does that mean we can call him Daddy?" Katie asked hopefully. Christopher felt tears sting his eyes. "If you want to, I would love that more than anything." Both girls threw their arms around him, and Christopher held them tight, marveling at how perfectly they fit in his arms and his heart. The reception was everything a community celebration should be: delicious food, heartfelt toasts, children running around and playing, adults catching up and making plans for the new year. The foundation families presented Rebecca and Christopher with a handmade quilt, each square decorated by a different family they'd helped. "This represents all the lives you've touched," explained Mrs. Henderson, whose medical bills had been among the first the foundation paid, "and all the hearts you've warmed." As the evening wound down, Christopher found himself standing with Rebecca in the same spot Wade proposed to her 2 months earlier, not the roadside where they'd first met, but in the foundation building that represented everything they'd built together. "So, Mrs. Hayes," he said, testing out her new name, "how does it feel to be married?" "Perfect," Rebecca said, leaning into him. "Everything about this feels perfect." "I have a wedding present for you," Christopher said, pulling out an envelope. "Christopher, you've already given me so much." "Open it," he said with a grin. Inside the envelope was a deed. Rebecca read it twice before she understood what she was looking at. "You're giving me half ownership of the foundation building." "I'm giving you half ownership of everything," Christopher said. "The building, the foundation, all of it. We're partners in everything now." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep building this dream with me." "Forever," Rebecca promised. As they prepared to leave for their brief honeymoon, a weekend in the mountains, with Katie and Sophie staying with Mrs. Thompson, Christopher was stopped by James Washington. "Got something I want to show you," James said, leading Christopher outside to the parking lot. Parked there was a brand new white SUV with a big red bow on top. "What's this?" Christopher asked. "Wedding present from the whole community," James explained. "That little car of Rebecca's isn't big enough for a family of 4, and we figured you'd be needing something more practical." Christopher was speechless. The generosity of this community never stopped amazing him. "There's more," James continued with a grin. "Check the glove compartment." Inside the glove compartment was another envelope, this one containing letters from dozens of families, all the people they'd helped through the foundation, plus many they hadn't even met yet. Each letter thanked them for what they'd built and promised continued support for the foundation's work. "This community loves you," James said simply. "You came here as a stranger and became family. That's not something that happens every day." As Christopher and Rebecca drove away from the foundation building that night, with Katie and Sophie chattering excitedly in the backseat about their new family and the wonderful wedding, Christopher reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all together. A year ago, he'd been a successful but lonely man with more money than purpose. Today, he was a husband and father, deeply embedded in a community that had taught him what love really looked like. The foundation was thriving, with plans to expand their programs and help even more families in the coming year. But more than that, Christopher had learned that success wasn't about accumulating wealth or achieving personal goals. Real success was about building something that made other people's lives better, creating connections that strengthened a community, and finding the courage to love and be loved in return. As they pulled into Mrs. Thompson's driveway to drop off the girls, Katie turned to Christopher with a serious expression. "Daddy," she said, Testing out the new name, are you going to keep helping people with Mama? For the rest of our lives, Christopher promised. Good, Sophie added. Because there are lots of people who still need teddy bears. Christopher and Rebecca looked at each other and laughed. The twins were right, as they so often were. There would always be people who needed help, families who needed support, communities that needed strengthening. And they would be there, together, building something beautiful one teddy bear at a time. Their story had started with two little girls selling handmade bays in the rain to help their sick mother. It was continuing with a foundation that had helped hundreds of families and a community that had grown stronger through their shared commitment to taking care of each other. And it would keep going, because the best love stories aren't about endings, they are about beginnings. And for Christopher, Rebecca, Katie, and Sophie Hayes, this was just the beginning of their beautiful life together.